Hello, this is Matt. Welcome to Unbearable 73. Today I'm just going to do probably hopefully a short video just talking about Plex Media Server, my setup, what I use it for, and a few tips or tricks I picked up for things I wish I had known ahead of time that I figured out on my own. There are many videos out there and guides on how to use Plex, but there are a few things I wish I had learned ahead of time, which would have saved me a lot of headaches that eventually I figured out. Okay. So first, let me tell you what Plex Media Server is. Plex is a home media server. So a lot of people have their DVDs and their Blu-rays, for example, and maybe the DVR that they have plugged into the TV, and you're stuck wherever those players are. So what you can do with Plex is on a computer, or you can use other devices. They have the server set up. Matter of fact, let's take a look. What do they actually have Plex available on? So there's a window. Let's go to Plex.tv. Let's just Plex Media Server for now. I don't want to go. I'll show you. So I go to here, Media Server downloads. So choose your platforms. When I did this, they basically Windows, Linux, and a couple of other. So now it's obvious. Look, it's available on all this stuff. I have run it on Linux. I've run it on Windows. I've run it on FreeNAS. I've run it on Synology, which I'll talk about in a minute. I've run it on one other system, just as a test to see. I'll run it in Docker. There's down there. Okay, and I'm not gonna explain what all that is, right? And these are your players, and you can play on all of this stuff here. So what that basically means is you set up a home server. Could be a simple little computer, especially if it's just you, say you, your wife, and your kids, or you and your mom or whatever, and you don't want to have shared outside of the home. You set up a server, you configure it, you make a media folder, you rip your Blu-rays and your DVDs into there. I'll eventually do a video all about that when I get my next set of Blu-rays that I'm gonna rip in, because there's something that I learned about that I want to share as well. But that scope of that is beyond this. But once you set up your server with your media on it, then anyone who had in your home who uses a Windows client or a client like on Xbox or Roku or whatever could easily watch it around your house without having to constantly load the media. And it's entirely legal in the U.S. because you're allowed to within your home. So once you have the media, you're allowed to do pretty much whatever you want with the content of it as long as it's in your home, okay, or shared with your immediate family. So you could take your Blu-ray, and your mom lives in Kansas. You can mail it over her so she can watch it if you wanted to. Okay, so and that by extension is another thing you do with your Plex server. Like my mother and my aunt, they gave me their entire Blu-ray and DVD collections, which is stuff I'll probably never watch, to be honest. But I ripped it all in there for them so they could watch it on all their TVs. Or another thing that got me through, I have had several hospital stays. Instead of having to pay for their crappy cable, I was watching my Plex server. And I think my aunt did that too with some old movies and stuff. So a bunch of my friends have basically I share with a couple of family and friends. Let them watch. I keep copies of their media and let them watch it wherever they want. And this also allows you to back up your media. I strongly recommend, even if you don't set up a Plex server, rip a copy of your Blu-ray or DVD, so if it ever gets damaged, you can make a copy of it, because you'll never get another free copy from them again. So you set up your server, and what does it look like? That's the main thing. I'll show you what my look like when it's set up, and then I want to talk about why I made some decisions on the setup. Okay, so now I have to use the web client to show you how my setup winds up looking. Okay, but there is a Windows desktop client, but the web client works fine. I just don't like to use. I prefer all my media to be locally loaded. Now, if I go back to here, what's called Home, this is what your default is. It actually doesn't have all of this stuff. I've added a few things on there. This is what Plex forces you to use, because they oftentimes have their Plex stuff on here. Matter of fact, I'm going to take a quick screenshot of I can't show you the Windows Plex client, as it won't show up in OBS, but I can do a little screenshot of what it looks like. Oh, sorry. So let's do it again. So I'll do 2 screenshots. The first one will be this. Okay, so now I'll go to OBS and I'll add that in there so you can see that. Okay. So you can see this now. So this is what it looks like when there's nothing on it. That, like, if you, as opposed to, this is how they configure by there when they put stuff on it. I don't like the home view, so I take everything off of it, and I prefer, even though it constantly goes here and it constantly have to go to more, I leave the Plex player open so I don't have to worry about that. And what does it look like when you have all the stuff in there? I'll do another little screenshot here. Okay. So if you hit that more button, did it work? And it hung up. So let's erase that. So let's do another one because it clearly hung up. There we go. And this is what it looks like inside if you go home into the home. And if you scroll down the bottom, which I'll show you here, this is the Plex Services. Like they have their live TV. This is my live TV, which I'll explain in a minute. Their movies and shows and their music. And Plex, like anything, even though you can use all your home media, they also have their own stuff they try to let you use that to get, which is advertiser driven. And that'll be perfectly fine. So if you want to cut the cord, you can cut it completely with just Plex, just like you could with Roku. But Plex lets you have all your own media in there as well. I personally don't use it very much except for the music once in a while. But I have all my CDs ripped into here. And whenever I download MP3s or whatever from like Amazon or Apple or whatever, I'll immediately put them in my Plex, you know. So let's get rid of that now. So what's the point of what's the point of what I wanted to show you here? Okay, so that's what it looks like now. Let's immediately get to the nitty gritty of the point of view here. Okay. Things I've learned about Plex. First thing, you'll notice I have two Plex Media Servers. I have Plex Ubuntu, which is kind of a legacy name because my first Plex server when I built it, I ran it on Linux for about 18 months, and I called the server Plex Ubuntu, and I would always run on an Ubuntu server. And the reason I stopped was, and this is first piece of advice, you have to constantly tweak your Linux server, and this is not a crack on Linux. I use it for other stuff, and honestly, at some point I will probably redo when I have more resources to put into it, which I have now. I'll get to that in a minute. I will probably run it on Linux once I get a different server set up. Again, because now I'm more familiar with the issues with Linux, and I want to get away from Windows for a lot of reasons, okay? But the first time you're running it, get yourself a copy of Windows 10, you can run Windows Server. People don't know this. You can run Windows Server 20, any of them for free for basically 3 years. There's a little caveat to that. There's a way you have to. Microsoft's perfectly fine with it for home use or educational use. I've had that Plex DVR's been running in a Windows 2019 server for a year now. Before that, it ran in a Windows 2016 server for 3 years until I ran out of the Microsoft's official legal resets. Then I built a new Windows Server VM out of it. Let's see if I can show you that. Let's see if OBS will allow that. Window capture. And where would it be? It will be. No. Yeah, it won't let me capture the application. I have a Microsoft Remote Desktop Connection Manager up. that I remote into my server with, and unfortunately, it won't let you show you that. That's not important. That's beyond the scope of what I'm talking about now. Cancel. So, I will talk about my server setup in a moment. So, Plex Ubuntu now runs on Windows 10 and probably will do so until after I move. My current server, it's a self build. I build all milk. I work in IT. I build thousands of computers. So me doing this stuff, if you're comfortable building computers, do it on your own, so to speak. It runs on AMD 3900X with a simple little consumer motherboard. It has 72 gigs of RAM. That's the main server. I'm currently running Windows 10 on it for now. And I run Windows Hypervisor, Hyper-V, and I run a bunch of server VMs on it, most of which are either Windows 10 or Windows Server 2019, and a couple of Linux servers that I got to run on there. But that's the next step I'm saying. Windows Hyper-V is not ideal for running anything other than Windows in it. Okay. Before this server, my old server for years was an HP DL360 G6, and I ran ESXi on that, which you can run for free, perfectly fine, for about 7 years. And the only reason I don't use that server anymore is because it started to not be powerful enough to do everything I need to do, which is obviously my Plex servers. Plus, as I work in IT, so I have to do home education, with to get my certifications and all that. So I needed a more powerful server. So for now, until the end of the year, this AMD 3900X based system, which is 24 cores and 72 gigs of RAM, is going to be my server. After I move, I want to make that my desktop. I want to build a new server and get back to running ESXi, because ESXi is a much more robust host system for virtual machines. Okay, and when I do that, then I will run, and I'll probably do a video on that, all that setup next year. That's when I will go back to Linux for my Plex server. Okay, so what's my next bit of lesson here? If you're new, go with Windows 10. Turn off, just load up Windows 10. You can load up on an old computer you have, as long as you have some home networking, which I'll talk about in a minute. Don't do wireless for this. But anyway, install Plex Media Server, install the Plex Media client or on a local machine. I recommend, and then you can basically get up and running in less than an hour. Okay. Now, the way I have it set up is I'm running under virtual machines. This is a good way for you to teach yourself this if you're want to learn IT related skills or just pick up the skill of other stuff. Spinning up simple little, loading up Hyper-V on your. You could even run, if you have a powerful desktop. Like my current desktop is more than powerful enough to run my Plex server and a VM on it itself, but I use it for professional means, so I'd rather keep the CPU cycles for work and entertainment purposes. But it's a good way to learn VMs. So, but anyways, start with Windows 10, load your Plex Media Server on either in a via. You can even run it on your regular desktop, but you won't get the experience of connecting to it with a client. That's what I'm getting at here. So once you get started, you're up and running. I'm not going to go into the whole how to build the libraries. The next thing I want to talk about is why I'm running two servers. This is the number one thing I wish I had learned going into this whole setup. Okay, so I cut the cord about 10 years ago. I had Netflix till about 5 years ago, and largely because I got it for free. But Netflix was kind of worth it to me until it got ridiculously expensive. I'm one person. I don't share my account. I don't have any kids or a wife or whatever. I have friends, girlfriend or whatever, who occasionally would use my Netflix. But I don't need, high def on two simultaneous TVs. They just kept upping the price. If there was a simple little $7 package for one use, one high def, I'd probably still have Netflix. Okay, but they just keep pricing you out of it, and maybe with all that's going on Netflix, they'll go back to sanity. Okay, I used to run some other streaming services like Hulu. I liked a long time ago, so I paid for that. That was a good buy for way back in the day. But with all the streaming services out there now, I have Amazon, or Amazoff as I call it because of the real time and fiasco. But I have that for more for the shipping advantages because of the bulk capacity. I and I'll watch obviously the program that interests me there, but again, you can cut the cord completely. I do have a cable package, but I haven't watched it, except for I log in to watch sports on there once in a while. But that's what I'm getting to on the next bit. Right? So I have two servers because when I cut the cord 10 years ago, I still wanted to watch broadcast TV because football and baseball and whatever. I still can get my basic sports. So I bought an HD antenna, and yes, the high definition TV is still broadcast out there. Okay, and I put it in my window, and I got what's called an HD home run, which was a two at the time it was a two antenna one, so I could be watching it on the desktop and simultaneously maybe recording it on another PC when I had a little home DVR setup for that, which Plex facilitates, and that's the reason I jumped to Plex, because Plex will read your HDR to your HD home runs. You can install them in it and get all the channels in Plex, which I think I can show you here. So here's what's on. Yep. Okay. So this is what I can see. Yep. So here we go. So this is what I can actually watch this in live TV through my HD home runs, which actually get a signal a different legal way now. But so what's the point of this a little bit? Well, whenever you're running your Plex server with TV broadcast and you have HD coming in, I have 6 now because I thought I went through so many cycles with it. I thought my original HD home run with the 2-channel was breaking. That's why I couldn't get. Why I kept dropping signal. Then I thought it wasn't powerful enough for high def. So I bought a modern with 4 channels, but I planned to only use 2, thinking I would get extra capacity. That'll let me record say 2 high def channels at a time, or watch one and record another. Still having the same problem. And eventually I thought, okay, well maybe it's because I'm running the Plex DVR under the same server as my main Plex server, and now that was the first clue to what was going on. Okay, what would happen is when I was watching HD TV, HD high definition TV, and or recording it, the signal would just cut out and drop. But if I would just watch through the HD Home Run app, it would work fine. So when I made a separate Plex server, what I found out, even on my more powerful home server, I made a separate VM with 8 separate CPU usages, so I wasn't sharing CPUs, and different RAM, and it got a lot more stable. It would only drop off when it was recording stuff, but if I was recording one HD program and set up to 3 non-HDs, I was okay. But if I tried to record 2 HD programs and watch anything else, again, I get the same problem. So I started thinking, like, wait a minute, did they just underpower pounding into this and leaving outside some of the more technical things I did? I was like, well, maybe the network adapter built into the HD home run is a problem, because one thing I experienced this in my professional capacity. I'm not going to say my company or what the applications are, but even though my company has $1 billion network, they basically don't manage traffic anywhere. So every single network card gets this gigantic bandwidth of all the traffic, with some exceptions. Okay, and so my server, one of them, which is an interface server, the network card gets pounded so hard by the network that the network buffer constantly gets overwritten and has to sort of say, "Oh, I just lost the last half a gigabit of communications. Resend it all." And it comes in, and then the communications are broken in half, so that half of one packet is put together with the back half of the other one, and this is garbage, right? So my company, with their $1 billion network, couldn't solve that, but the vendor made a fixed application that would basically take the data coming in its broken state, reinterpret it, and rebuild it properly for the application to interpret it. So that was my initial thought for my home situation. Was for my HD home runs that they have what's called a megabit, not a gigabit. So it's gigabits 10 times more capacity than a megabit. Not to get over technical about it. I thought that wasn't enough, but then I did some math, and someone pointed out to me that, well, look at the compression. It's H.264 compression. Do the math. They showed me how to do some of the math from the signal, the TV signal, to check if the CPU on the HD Home Runs was powerful enough, and it was. Even do 4 capacity, and even to use the HD Home Run software to have 4 separate HD signals, no problem. So what the problem came down to was my internal network bandwidth. Okay, now most people with your home networks, you have some sort of cheapo. Let me phrase this properly. I'm going to open up an Amazon window here. Amazon. So I'm just going to type in Netgear. And this is the type of thing most of you have in your home. Something that looks like this. And yeah, they're not inexpensive, and yeah, they work for the most part. But from the professional point of view, they're cheapo. Okay? Why are they cheapo? Because the CPU and RAM in them and the internal networking is crap. They're, without getting, again, to avoid the complications, there are three types of network interface device. Okay? There are routers, hubs, and switches. A router connects to networks. So your internet connects to your home network through your router. Okay? A hub connects one set of network ports with another set. And a switch does the same thing, but on a one-to-one basis. What is the difference? Okay, so if you have, let's say you have 4 devices, like a cell phone, and let's say 2 cell phones trying to connect through, and there's a wire, let's say, and they're trying to connect to a hub structure to share an internet port. This port, when this port's transmitting to the internet port, the other port's completely blocked, right? And then when this port's transmitting to whatever device it is, it's broadcasting the same signal to all the ports, okay? So that obviously cuts down on your capability. A switch establishes one-to-one connections between all devices. So this could be transmitted to the internet port. Another device could be transmitted to my other phone. My desktop could be transmitted to the internet port as well. And then they go to the port in the switch, and the switch feeds it to the router. And the router says, "Okay, got the first one, send it out to the internet. Got the second one, send it to the internet," and it sort of queues it up. The router is best doing the routing, not doing the switching. To quote something I heard a long time ago, don't let your router do your switching at all. Your switch can do routing. You don't want it, but it can. It can take the burden off a router if you have a high capacity, a lot going on in your network. But your router should never do switching. Okay? So what did I do? This is years ago. My specialty IT-wise back then was more. I was more in terms of system analyst for software of the application I deal with, which is interestingly Perionil. Some database stuff, and what we would call field services, desktop computers and whatever. So I didn't know much about server infrastructure and networking, but this was my education into it. So I wound up buying a business grade switch. Now, what was the difference? Okay, well, the business, I bought a Ubiquiti Unified US24, and I bought a USG, Ubiquiti USG home gateway to be just my router and Dutch firewall and stuff, and a switch to do all the switching. So there's one point of connection from that switch to that router. Then I allocated one port to a Wi-Fi access point, and then all my other ports on my switch, which is back there behind me. I'll call it up on the screen so you can see what I had. Unify US24. So this is basically my switch right here, okay? And all those other ports, so all my internal bandwidth, like if my computer is talking to my Plex server and my TV is talking to my Plex server and my phone is talking to my Plex server, they can all do that internally without having to mess with the router doing anything but routing to the internet. And more importantly, okay, my 2 HD home runs have their own direct ports, and they could communicate directly to the application separately with a much more powerful processor and RAM in that switch, and way more internal bandwidth. I think it's 285 gigabytes per second of internal bandwidth on that switch versus on the home router I showed you might have 100 at most. Okay, and that combined with the more powerful processor and CPU. As soon as I went to this setup, 99% of my problems with Plex DVR went away. Now, I was still running on a single hard disk, a very large one, an 8 GB hard disk, and I thought I'd never fill that, But between DVR and then, digitizing my Blu-rays and DVDs and my friends and whatever, I've gone well past that. All right. So the last percent of problems came to since I was using one hard disk running to a USB port. Even though it had a lot of raw bandwidth, it couldn't manage the constant data too. So there would be file disruptions and whatnot. And so I eventually switched to. At the time, I built my own home NAS, and which is much more powerful than what I have now. But it was loud, and I was in a small apartment, and so I eventually switched to a Synology NAS, and I have 4x8, a 3220. I have 21 point something terabytes of raw space, of which I have 3 terabytes left, which is plenty for the next year or two, before I eventually have a lot more 4K content and all that. And so that's the last thing I wish I had learned. That you need, if you're going to do this seriously, you need to have an actual switch to manage all that traffic. So your intake from the HD home runs or the HD signals does not get disrupted by other devices taking away that bandwidth. And that was what was causing those dropouts and disruptions on my DVRs and my watching HD through Plex. Because it was an indirect connection, which fine, yeah, you could argue I could use HD home run, but the HD home run app isn't on my phone or most of my other 2 TVs. So, or when I was in the hospital, there's no way I had access to it. I wouldn't be able to watch the game or whatever, So, but now with my Plex setup, if I want to sit on my couch and watch on my computer, which is my main thing I'm looking at right now, see the couch behind me, I can watch the game on there. Or if I have to lay in bed for medical reasons, what I do a couple hours a day, something I could call up my channels over there. I can call up my media server. It works out so much better having that separate switch for the bandwidth, and having a separate NAS. And it doesn't have to be a complicated. If you just go with that one extra PC to run your Plex server, if you build a software NAS in there, get 3 8 terabyte disks, and tell Windows to make a software RAID array out of it. There's guides to that. Eventually, I'll show you how to do that. Unky Joe's Playhouse has a bunch of good videos on that. I'll link to him below. He had a lot of good entry-level IT stuff for you on his channel. So that's that about the Plex server setup. Those are the bits I wish I had known getting into it. It would have saved me a year and a half of heartache getting the Plex DVR thing to work. Okay. So what else to talk about? Last thing I wish I had known, and I didn't find too late, 4K content. 4K, you need. Okay, so the way Plex works is you have the files on your server, is on your NAS. When you want to watch a movie, it'll load it up, and if it's 1K content, you're not going to have any problems with it. It'll encode it on the front end and do a little bit of decoding on the back end, and you're good, right? 4K takes a lot of encoding and decoding, and so I would never do 4K outside the home, and unless you have everyone has fiber, then you're fine. Because my server is more than powerful enough. I have, I think I gave it 8 CPUs. I could even ease it up more to that, and eight of the AMD 3900X CPUs is more powerful than 24 of what was an HP DL360, which were 24 cores of a 15-year-old Intel processor, which still was pretty robust. It was a server-end CPU, but I can run two 4K movies, 6 or 7 high-def movies, be listening to music through my Plex, and maybe it uses 10% server capacity with spikes. That's the one thing you want. If it's 10%, why do you need 8 CPUs? Because it will spike occasionally. And when it spikes, if you watch, that's when you want to have those extra CPUs so that the spike only goes to 67%, and you don't disrupt whatever you're doing on watching your movie, right? So, and the last thing about 4K, put it in a separate library, so you control access to it, so you don't have it. So, like, my little brother can watch, a horror movie or whatever, and on 1080p, and if he comes over my house, he can watch a 4K, say Lord of the Rings or whatever, So that's my basic on Plex. If you have any questions down below, feel free to ask me, type them in, communicate with me. There are other sort of solutions out there like MB. I should say, I am not sponsored by Plex, but I do have the Plex Pass, which is $35 a year. The Plex Pass, the only reason you really need the Plex Pass, if you have the server, it gets you the free guide, okay? The television guide, it will download it for you. And if you want to watch it on your phone, you need to have the Plex Pass because they have to do extra conversions through their servers to make it work on this through the cellular network. Now if your phone's accessing through strictly Wi-Fi on your home router, no issue there. But it's when it goes through the cellular network, it needs extra processing. Okay. I suppose the last thing I should mention is I re-encode everything to H.265, and I will give you when I get my Blu-rays. When I get my next set of Blu-rays, I'll do a video on how I rip them and convert them. Then I would strongly recommend going that direction if you're going to investigate it, just because it saves you so much in hard drive space. 1 terabyte of H.265 encoded movies would be like 10 terabytes in H.264. So anyway, that's been my Plex Media Server setup and what I wish I had known ahead of time about it and would have saved me some grief. If you have any questions, type them up down below. And I will do my next video on Plex probably when I'm going to buy a Blu-ray in a couple weeks. There's a couple of movies I want to... The Northman comes out in June. I'm definitely buying that. And the next Naruto Blu-ray, which is the 1080p remaster of Naruto, probably get that around that time too. So, I'm Matt. This has been Unbearable 73. Have a nice night. I am out of here.